Still Wakes the Deep review. Soaked in sea horror and shiveringly good voice acting. A first-person North Sea horror that doesn't push the boat out but still excels within its genre. Developer, The Chinese Room. Secret Mode release, June 18, 2024. Windows from Steam, Epic Games. Scottish petrochemical horror is not exactly a genre, but maybe it ought to be. From the opening moments of Still Wakes the Deep, you know life on its 1970s North Sea oil rig is precarious. It's a classic pre-disaster setup for a mostly traditional monster story, yet the game sticks expertly to the first-person horror form, and its voice actors' performances are so spot-on that it'd feel churlish to judge this foaming fear simulator for sticking to type. It also has some markedly unsettling use of the shipping forecast, a famously dull feature of British radio I definitely did not expect to freak me out in a video game. You are Kaz, an electrician employed on the Beira D, an oil rig operating in the rainy winter of 1975. Alongside you are a number of fellow workers pushed to the ends of their tethers, patching up the ragged rig with screws and their own unease with bravado and banter. Talking to everyone on the rig is like taking an earbath in Scottish slang. Which sounds disgusting when I type it out like that, but in reality is a refreshing change from the non-regionalized US chatter that often appears as the main voice in games writing. Scotland doesn't get many hyper-localized stories like this in our industry, and certainly none this high fidelity, so it's pleasing for once to hear authentic Glaswegians playfully insulting one another and chatting about the darts, as opposed to the exaggerated facsimile of the same voice frothing out of the mouth of an angry dwarf. Something fleshy and macabre makes its way out of the sea and onto the rig, spreading its tendrils and angry, mother-of-pearl blisters into the supports and corridors. Much of the remaining dialogue might be summarized as screeches in Scottish, as your crewmates succumb to monstrification and gory death. An early run-in with one of these monsterpals introduces you to a dedicated "look behind you" button, a terrifying temptation for any horror game enthusiast. As far as what the game generally feels like to play, its desperate vent crawling, lever pulling and locker hiding put me most in mind of Alien Isolation. The themes of workers existing in unsafe conditions has definite parallels to the stretched crew of the Nostromo and the broken infrastructure of Sevastopol Station. The lifeboats are fitted with crappy cables, broken doors fail to open for trapped engineers, and the rig's foul-mouthed manager insists the monster problem is merely a minor drill issue, far past the point of catastrophe. That fear doesn't only come from the monsters. The voices and behavior of the crew are so firmly grounded that when it starts to introduce familiar video game tasks, such as balancing your way across a beam suspended above a raging sea, my seafarer brain said, "Nah mate, nah." In any other circumstance, I would have accepted the bright yellow beam as a passable, expected thing, as common as a red barrel ready to explode. Here, the first time these traversable game obstacles showed up, I felt legitimate anxiety. Kaz drops to his knees and crawls across the beams slowly and swearily. The game loses some of that grounded charm later, by upping the peril to include ridiculous action movie climbing solutions in scenarios where any normal person can spot several safer routes, none supported by the game's pathing. Gone are the days when developers The Chinese Room would slap you on a Hebridean island with only the barest guidance. Here the visual language of first-person horror comes through with the clarity required by the medium. The only time I felt this guidance break down was in later moments when environments became flooded. At some points you are submerged and have to drag yourself along support beams while underwater. It also suffers from the traditional problem of game horror, in that the tension is broken the more you die. This goes for both rising water and your groaning ex-colleagues. Each monster you encounter is intentionally and disturbingly named for the person who remains trapped in the hideous schlep of tendons, gristle, and sinew that propels them around. Another drags itself about on the floor like a slug. Some of these things were once your friends, and Kaz is continually swearing with horrified pity at them. Others, who were antagonistic to you during the pre-disaster opening, feel even more unmerciful and wretched in monster form. It's an old theme of horror, that humanity and monstrousness can coexist within the same body. He is a messer with an upturned marriage and a criminal history, a man who might as well be walking around the oil rig screaming, "She's turned the weens against us," at the hideous flesh horrors that have taken over. I felt his personal story of love, cowardice and irresponsibility lost some momentum towards the end, when the game starts to rely on well-worn disembodied voices and other weirdness to lean into psychological horror, as opposed to the classic monster movie it otherwise sticks to being. Like all the others, the voice actor does an excellent job, right down to the harried breathing that kicks in any time a monster comes near you. The troubles of Kaz, like those of others on the rig, feel ordinary against the backdrop of all this horror. And I feel that's the game's great strength, in contrasting the otherworldly shimmering rainbow hellishness of Jeff Vandermeer's Annihilation with the gray pessimism of a Caledonian winter. Kaz, personal scramble for survival and forgiveness is just one way in which its disturbing tale can be read. It is notable that there is one woman on board the Beira oil rig, the engineer Finley. However, you might step away from the rig. I stepped away rattled, impressed, and hungry for more horror as solid as this. It may not revolutionize the genre in any mechanical sense, even that "look behind you" button is something from the Outlast series, but it does set a bar for groundedness and naturalistic voice acting. This review is based on a review build of the game provided by the developer.